Hello and welcome to TechWhirl's Fast 5 discussions, and thank you for joining us for today's show. My name is Al Martin. I'll be moderating our discussion. We're hitting an unusual topic for content management. We're going to talk about small and mid-sized businesses. Normally, at least in our opinion, they're told, go mess it up, wait until you're bigger, and then we'll find a solution. It's always seemed somewhat counterintuitive to us, and it seems also counterintuitive to our guest today. We're chatting with Patrick Bosick of EasyData, and he has some thoughts and some solutions that can help small businesses with their content management. Patrick is the co-founder of Josick LLC. It's a company who makes EasyData. He's spent a lot of time working on products focused on improving authoring, production, and the distribution of content. Most recently, his primary focus has been on EasyData. Patrick, welcome, and how's it going?
Thanks, Al. It's going quite well.
Good deal. So there have been whispers, and not so much of whispers in some ways, for EasyData 2016, and that it's right around the corner. Can you shed some light on it? How is that going?
It's going pretty well. We actually have a webinar introducing the new version next Wednesday, so 1 week from today. The new version is a very major upgrade for us, so it's a rewrite of many aspects of the user interface. We kept a few pieces, but in general, it's almost a completely rebuilt piece of software. So it's really, you know, by a lot of measures, the most modern CMS or CCMS that's out there these days, and we're really excited about getting it out into the market and, you know, having all of our customers moved over to it, and then, you know, our anybody who decides they want to sign up with us in the near future starting to use it as well.
That's what we heard. I remember we've looked at it and have used it a little bit, and then Jackie Samuels, our resident expert on did a review for you guys and came back. I remember being on the call with her, and she came away really impressed, and I know that was months and months and months ago, so I know that you've been making a lot of improvements, and it's been kind of moving toward release. So yeah, we're looking forward to it. To get to the webinar, you would go where? Like to know about the webinar, where would you go? On your website?
Yeah, I would believe it's on the website. I'm sure we could follow up with a link to maybe. We edit this and put this online. Is this live? I'm not, because I'm not totally sure how this works.
No, so yeah. So the answer is yes, we're live.
Oh, okay, great.
But at the same time, we can put a link into the invite or the page that we're there. We'll go ahead, and then if anybody watching this, or tens of people watching, if by some chance you are interested, just send us a note at TechWhirl. We'll get you that, and we'll get the link out there as well. So certainly be able to get that information out as well.
Sounds good.
Connie, how's it going? World of content technology, communications.
The world of content technology and communications just continues to move in all sorts of interesting directions. You know, we continue to publish useful and helpful, we hope helpful articles for folks who are not only in the technical communication end of the spectrum, but folks who are working in content strategy, customer experience, user experience, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, you know, and our good old TechWhirl list continues to debate and discuss all sorts of topics. So we invite folks. It's free to join. There's no cost in any of this to check that out. It is old-fashioned, really ancient technology in comparison email discussion group. At some point we'll find the right solution that can combine our email group with our online forums and bring everybody together in the same general world. But in the meantime, you do have a couple of options to participate in the TechWhirl community.
All right, so before we get into it and talk about Fast Fives, let's talk just for a minute about EasyData. They're one of our partners. They've been a longtime partner of ours, and we've worked with them very closely. And this discussion moving forward is really about small businesses and mid-sized businesses, and Patrick here as an expert. But we would be remiss to not help promote them some. And the best we'll say, and we'll hit this at the end as well, is there are advertisements on our website. They're easydata.com. It's an easy site to find. if you're in a market for a structured solution or you have some questions, advanced CCMS capabilities, we just say, hey, check them out. There's a free trial there. Get into it, ask lots of questions. They got great feedback and customer support, and just take a look, right? And you make the decision yourself. But just take a look at them. Very good option and a very reasonable price, especially if you're a small or mid-sized business, given some of the pricing that's out there. So anyway, that's the shameless commerce section of the show, and let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about Fast Fives. Effectively, we have 5 questions that we've worked on that we wanted to talk with Patrick about. We've also had some submitted questions. So if you got one of our reminders, then you know that you were able to ask a question there. So we got at least a couple there. And if by some chance you're following along and you want to ask a question during this broadcast, if it is January 20th and you're watching this, then use the Twitter account hashtag TWFast5. And you'll be able to submit a question on there. If we see those, we handle those right away. If it comes in a little bit late, then we'll certainly pass it on to Patrick and he'll get back to you after that. So there are a lot of questions, and it's certainly a huge topic for companies as they're growing and their documentation needs. So let's go ahead and start. Hey, Connie, do you want to ask the first question?
Sure do. We've been covering the technical communications world for a long time, and we know that data and structured authoring in particular have become the focus of a lot of content discussion over the last few years. Usually in terms of large companies and how difficult the implementations are and what you got to look out for and those sorts of things. But I'd like to, as we're moving into 2016, ask you, Patrick, if you could frame the cost-value question of data in terms of what we're dealing with in the new year.
Sure. So, this is the question that I really like for small businesses these days, because I think the reason that we've had a blocker in smaller organizations working with more structured solutions is really the cost. And that's because you look at the cost of these types of solutions in the past, and they're very, very expensive. And they didn't really integrate the rest of the stack. So if you look back 2, 5, 10 years, most organizations have either a static website or they've got some very simplistic CCMS behind it. And when I say most organizations, I mean smaller ones, of course. And then they have documentation pieced off someplace else, and their support probably looks like some combination of a ticketing system and just phone calls in general, where I think there was a lot of still usage of phone support, and I think that's going away a little bit. So if you look at the total ecosystem in which content exists for these organizations and what the benefit of this is, the cost of building an ecosystem that can deliver effective content that's a little bit more than marketing to a customer or somebody who's investigating a product has really gone down very significantly. So portals in the past that were things that were possible to be updated and federated across an organization were 6 figures minimum. If you look back, not that far into history, you had to put out big expenditures to get reasonable search, reasonable control, reasonable versioning, those types of things on structured content that was presented on the web. So most organizations weren't able to afford that type of situation. And if you're a smaller organization, so you're a smaller manufacturer or a software company or something like that, that really hinders your ability to compete, especially in today's day and age, because we all know that a huge part of the pre-purchasing process is a customer going and doing product research on their own outside of a sales engagement or a marketing engagement or brochures or whatever those things may be. So you're not having that direct interaction. It has to be a passive interaction. And to do that, you really need to be effectively publishing semi-technical content. So if you want to be an organization that's able to compete with similar sized organizations, but even more so larger ones, you have to be able to take this technical content and put it online, make it accessible, and start to mix it into the marketing content where someone's doing pre-purchasing decision making. So, getting back to the cost value with all that I just said, I believe that the cost has really come down dramatically, and I believe the value has gone up. So if you look at the tools, that's a large part of the reason the cost has come down. There's also a lot more knowledge out in the industry to make it easier to train yourself and your people on being able to effectively implement these solutions. And in terms of the value has gone up because buying behavior has changed. People go out and they try things, they research things, they read things. They don't take salespeople's word for granted anymore. So if you're looking at a traditional model, which looks like having salespeople interacting directly with prospects and then trying to go through that process, is not going to be as successful. So lower cost due to tools primarily, higher value due to change in buyer behavior.
Okay. Let me ask a little bit of a follow-up here, because it sounds like what you're saying is that because I've seen in a lot of large and small organizations, traditional tools of choice and whatever, and a lot, in addition to the cost of implementing a solution like this, you've also got that whole change is bad kind of mentality. They don't want to necessarily learn a new tool. So is part of the cost value proposition these days, because it is less expensive and easier to use and whatnot, that it can be thought of as more of an enterprise solution rather than a specialized solution?
So I think the ease of use is a big part of it. If you look at the people who are in this industry, a technical writer really had to use either FrameMaker or Microsoft Word in the past. That was kind of your options if you go back 10 years. And Microsoft Word, I don't think it's something that's easy to use personally, but it's something that we all know how to use. So, that basically transfers into easy to use for most people. And FrameMaker, was a very, very leading edge product, and it still continues to be a good product in many ways. But if you look at getting into something that is really separation of presentation and content, content and presentation, that allows you to single source publish the PDFs that are probably still required, and then to the website, which is really the high value for most organizations. You have to get into something that's more of a data type solution, something that's really pure XML. And those solutions in the past, they had kind of a steep learning curve. It was something that was difficult to just drop into an organization. There's a lot of resistance to change. There's a lot of opinions on that, as you were saying. And I think that's changed a lot, and I'm not saying just because of our organization. I think our organization is one that's pushing for that change. But in many ways, there are other organizations that are doing that as well. I mean, you've seen, really big advancements in Oxygen's XML authoring environment in the last, 4 or 5 years. They've really come a long way. We've seen some new players come into the market that have good lighter weight solutions or contributor style solutions. You've seen a lot of maturity growing in the general CMS space. You've seen a lot more information coming out around how to use maybe less traditional tools like GitHub and things like that to store content. Now, they're probably not optimal either, but allows you to get into things more easily. So I think you have lower barriers to this process. So I think you get less resistance when you go in and you try some things and see how you socialize it. And maybe Oxygen doesn't work, but EasyData does work, or maybe EasyData doesn't work, but Oxygen does for your authoring group, as opposed to what you got in the past, which is, we're Microsoft. I don't think actually Microsoft has undergone this process, but first major company that popped in my head. You went out and you hired a consulting firm and you said, we're doing this, and management, ran through the halls with a banner and said, everybody's getting on board, and then all these consultants came in and they trained everybody, and there was this big event to move people from one place to the other. And I think that meets resistance because it's being pushed onto people, whereas having a lower barrier to get into some of the tools and processes. So learningdata.com, great example of being able to go and just on your own learn how to use some of these things. Having more access to those things means that people can socialize and adapt it themselves without having to have someone come in and tell them how to do it. I think that makes a major difference.
Okay.
So you mentioned a few of them, and it's probably good to talk through what we're suggesting is the future But what tools, from your experience, what tools do most small businesses are using for documentation now? And why do you think they're continuing to use these rather than doing the exploration of other options?
So I think it's surprising to me how often we still see Word, which it doesn't matter how many times a day or a week it happens, it still shocks me. So I think that in a lot of ways people are using a combination of Word and Wiki. And Wiki works reasonably well depending on your requirements. But it's one of those things where you pretty much know that if you get into a situation where you need more targeted content, or you need content that has a little more intelligence, or you want to take some of that technical content and present it to a user in more of a pre-purchased type of environment. So for instance, mixing your technical content with your marketing content to get kind of a blended content that is still marketing oriented, so it's educating someone before they purchase, but is technical enough that it's more educational as opposed to salesy, then the wiki just kind of breaks down. It doesn't really work for that anymore. So if you have any type of ambition with what you're going to do with the knowledge resources and the content resources in your business, they don't really function the way that you want them to, but they're very cheap. So in most cases, Word is a sunk cost not only from a software perspective, but it's also a sunk cost from a training perspective. I mean, I hate Word, but I know how to use it. And a wiki, for all intents and purposes, they're fairly easy to use. I mean, you have wiki text, and if nothing else, there are wikis out there that are, they're drop dead simple to post content to. So, I think those are a lot of the tools that we see, and in some cases, organizations are really okay with those because it's a lot of little bits of pain that's very effectively hidden throughout the organization, and they're not aware of the things they could be doing that would be beneficial on a greater scale. So they just stick with it. It's like, okay, well, we've got a wiki, the information's in there somewhere, and we write these documents up in whatever our unstructured environment is, and we revise them every cycle, and we send them to our customers when they ask for them. And that's kind of doing business on a day-to-day. And, if you're not really getting beat on that level and you're not really thinking about it, maybe that's not a place that, it pops into your head on a daily basis that it's wrong. So, or wrong might be the wrong term, that it could be better.
So let's unpack that a little bit. You said hidden in various parts of the organization. In a future, right, using a tool such as yours or one of the other ones, but yours, what can you do? Like, what would be the benefit of going through the change, going through the expense, going through the training, and then in the future, what does that look like? What are you doing then?
So I think that what we do as an organization is a really great example of that. So we obviously use our software, and we have our repository set up so that we have pretty much all of our content in our software. And what that allows us to do is we have our user documentation, which is our user guide, and that's very traditional docs stuff. And then we have tutorials, and we're actually about to be publishing a big slew of them in the next couple of weeks. They reuse a lot of pieces of the user guide, but they wrap it in a lot more content that's a lot more educational. And then we have stuff that really is like training content. And that ends up leveraging at least 50%. It's 50% reused almost every time, even when it is customized to a particular customer. So we'll just create a training manual for a customer. We'll pull in the pieces of the user guide or tutorial pieces that make sense, and we'll fill the rest of it in with learning content. So we have a really effective learning, training, documentation, tutorial type of an infrastructure. But on top of that, we also put all of our blogs in our software. We put all of our RFPs. Anything that's a proposal goes in our software, unless it's a very, very small proposal, and then we usually just scratch it out in Google Docs and throw it over to somebody. But if it's longer than 2 pages, it goes in Easy Data. And that's really great because very often the same requirements come through for our type of software, as I'm sure you can imagine. And if you're a software company, I bet you have that case too. And you have tables of these requirements with all these different things, and we will just conref answers into the table So for these of you who are coming from Word, conref is content reference, and it's just like creating a link over to some content that includes it, just a paragraph or two or something right in that location. And then we'll include other pieces as appendices to these RFPs. So we actually saw our time to respond to RFPs drop by at least 50% when we went to this method. And if you look at the RFPs pre and post, I'm very, very much of the opinion that our post RFPs are much, much stronger, and they're just better put together because the content is, most of it's reused, so it's strongly reviewed, most of it's templatized off of something else, all those types of things. So it gives us the ability to be a lot more agile and effective with the content that we own, which is for us a huge asset. Content is probably our biggest sales asset. It's definitely our biggest marketing asset, and it's probably the biggest asset we have that proves to our customers and potential customers that we are a very well put together organization. We really know what we're talking about, and we're the right people to work with in the situation that we are the right people to work with for them. So I guess how does this all tie together? We're a small company. We're probably smaller than everybody else who's watching this video. And we're able to use these tools really effectively, and we know that they make a really big difference for our organization. So we have what I feel is one of the most functional content setups that I've seen. You would hope so, obviously. And we're able to do it with very, very little resources. And we end up with the ability to publish directly to our website, reuse content whatever it should be reused, remix materials for customers to do just-in-time or targeted publishing, publish to a docs portal, which is a WordPress portal, and that provides us with a really nice user interface, search, and browse capability. And WordPress is so cheap that it's almost not even something you notice when you're purchasing it. I think we pay like $30 a month for our documentation portal. So we have all of these capabilities that make us, reduce our support costs and make us more effective as a general organization. And it really comes out of having a strong methodology around how our content is built, structured, and deployed.
Nice. Final question, and this is all part of 2, by the way. We're not cheating on our 5. But final question. So one tool, publishing everywhere. How long? So I would imagine most people who you hire they've probably taken a look at the tool before you go through the interview process. You're probably hiring them on skills and capability versus knowledge of your software. How long on average, would it take to go from I've never looked at this type of tool before to working effectively on a proposal or publishing to the web? How long does that take? The ballpark.
So we're pretty efficient, and I guess it depends on exactly how effective you want someone to be. So going from no knowledge to being able to explain to you what a key ref is in DITA, that's a different time frame than going in and being able to copy a proposal template, fill it out, and produce a PDF. Being able to do basic authoring, it's almost day one. Okay. I'm tempted to look across the room and ask one of the people who just started with us this month how she's doing with editing in the software. Now, that said, being able to go in and write content in software is a completely different thing than being able to effectively follow the style guide and processes in the business that make that content valuable. So one of the things I really want to emphasize here is that even though the tools have gotten better and cheaper, it doesn't mean that they're a substitution for process. So having a well-organized, well-thought-out structure and style guide around the type of content you're creating, and then also having the right process in place so that when that content gets created, it gets organized effectively, it gets notified, it gets reviewed, all those types of things. There's no substitution for that stuff. So if tools make it more efficient, that's great, but it doesn't remove that requirement anyway. And inside of our business, people usually pick that stuff up within a month and a half, 2 months. They start to get pretty good at that stuff. If that's not their core function, if their core function is content creation, it's a week or less, or maybe 2 weeks the most.
Right on. Okay. Yeah, that's cool. All right, Connie, your question there.
That's a nice segue into, because one of the things you talked about in your organization, and is likely to be true, it is true in most of the small organizations that I've worked with over the years, that you don't necessarily have a team of people whose sole job is to author content.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got people who might have, end up having to do this because they seem to be suited to it. So my question revolves around, particularly for the smaller organization, who are the most likely, the best suited kinds of people to work on building out that user support documentation solution? I remember for many years it was, let's get the admin to do that because she knows how to use Word. And so it was always this, if you know how to use Word, then you can be a technical writer thing, which we all railed against for many years. But in terms of the kinds of that blended content that you mentioned, what kind of people in a small organization tend to be able to handle that?
Well, so I think that in most of our cases, our customers will have at least one person who is primarily an information developer. And I think you see a lot of other people helping them. And for us, generally speaking, those people are developers or engineers, from our experience. And, that's in the TechCom aspect of our of our business. And we actually have a pretty significant part of our business is organizations that all they do is content, so it doesn't really apply there. But if you're talking specifically about TechCom, one of the things that I would really, really push people to do is, if you don't have someone whose job, their primary role is information development, you're really missing out on the value that person can bring to your organization. So we hired an information developer very, very early in the size of our company. So I kind of look at that and I say, if we are balancing these things, and when we were that size, if we could afford an information developer, realistically any organization can afford an information developer. So who's doing this today? You probably have engineers or software developers writing documentation in whatever that may be. And then you have some type of handoff to someone who's more of a marketing role to try to post that wherever it is they may post it. I think it's probably often PDFs. But as you move into the more of the internet-driven, research-driven economy, that I think is really the underpinnings of this conversation, I think having someone whose job it is to manage that, they have a very high ROI. So you should definitely have that in your pipeline if it's not there already. If you're too small for a tech writer, just reconsider.
Okay.
So what are the typical small business that they're watching this, or they've seen it on YouTube later, they're really, you've gotten them thinking again about the strategy and the process and the approach for their documentation, support docs. What are the resource requirements here to do it right?
Well, I think like anything else, somebody's got to own it. I think that's the really big thing. So if you look at it, in a lot of ways, it's very, very easy to forget about documentation. And I think that's part of the reason is because it's documentation, and we're just trained in our day-to-day lives that documentation is secondary to whatever the product is. But in many, many cases, it's not. And once you classify that information development role as a documentation role, I think that it puts it in a box mentally where it devalues it. And the reality is that the people who do the information development, they don't just create the user manual. They create all of the information and knowledge around this that makes a successful customer, and they manage that, and they do the library science on it to make it accessible. They bring down support costs, those types of things. So I think because in the past you were primarily writing a book and shipping it with a product, that mentality hasn't completely left all organizations to the point where the marketing and website people are more integrated with the overall idea of an information development, a training, learning support type of a person. So what are the resource requirements? I think the primary resource requirement is having an information developer or having someone whose job it is to own information development. I think that's where you start with this, and then you start to look at, what's infrastructure look like, what do tools look like, how do they interact with the rest of the organization, what's our process.
Gotcha. How much does that fall on whether it's a very small company and it's the CEO or manager versus bringing an SME in? What's the difference there? What if I'm a CEO and I hear this and I really want to go do it? What would you recommend to the main kind of the person driving everything versus, say, a manager versus someone trying to argue for this from the bottom up? So what would be some of those key things you would recommend?
So you're a CEO of a tiny ship. Well, I think that in that case, you're probably working with, probably starting from very little, and you probably need to pick somebody up if you don't have somebody who fits into this role. And one of the really nice parts about that is there are people who are trained in this stuff. I mean, there actually are college degrees, so you can go and you can pick up students that have gone through the process of a formal education in technical publications. That's that is a real thing. Of course, there's also a lot of veteran technical authors out in the marketplace. So you kind of decide, do you want somebody who's going to be a little more junior coming in, who's going to kind of take direction, and you can set the pace for what it's going to be inside of your organization, or do you want someone who's a little bit more senior and has a lot of process background and those types of things, who's going to come in and drive it for you? So when you kind of make that decision, you're picking your path in terms of how involved you're going to be, how much of this you're going to be deciding on your own, how much you're going to be building in terms of process. Like, even though software, process isn't physical software, it isn't a physical machine, process takes time to build, and it can be expensive and time resources. So you kind of weigh those things and you decide, how you want to go about it, and you pick someone up who's senior. You can probably drop them into the organization and then basically set social tone in a way where this person's position is this. They are not just writing a user manual. They are information development. They are responsible for making our customers knowledgeable, successful, and happy through the use of developing content materials for them to leverage. And as long as people understand that this person that you have brought in is not documentation, this person is realistically passive customer support. They are there to make the people who use your software better, more knowledgeable, more efficient, software, hardware, whatever it may be that you produce. I think that has a very different tone. So I think that that's really a really important part of the process, is making sure that we understand why these people are here, what the value is, and talking about customer success, talking about customer knowledge, those types of things. Those just intrinsically have more value to most people. So that's kind of where I would start from the social perspective. So find somebody, socialize them right, introduce them to the team, set up the conversation properly, and then you kind of worry about tools and how you're actually going to do the job. But hopefully, if it's a senior person, they've got some ideas about that, or they've got a little bit of background in something.
Often our small business friends, or one of them, rarely want to pay for the senior folks. Mm-hmm. And so let's say they went to a junior or somewhere in the mid, right? They understand it. They're trying to give them a shot. They think there's a capability there, but they might not be the most senior person. If I'm that junior, what are some of the key things that is a bunch of stuff that I would have learned at my school or I've been experiencing? What are some of the key things, especially early in the process and the new hire, that the CEO should be hearing, right, around process, like being able to find problems with the process, or I should be saying and focusing on, right, that would mean that we were going in the right direction if I was getting recommendations? So
I think in this day and age, and this is going to sound a little self-serving because of the name of our product, but there's a whole marketplace around it. I think that data experience or data knowledge is a requirement, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to end up using data tools, but the practices and the concepts that data provides to someone who's an information developer are extremely valuable. And if you're looking at starting from square one, there are other options, but are there options that are not data options that are really good long-term decisions? That's a conversation that was a lot more hotly debated, I think, a few years ago. So I think that's probably one of the things I would start with, is I'd want to see that type of experience. Looking at the process aspect, I would be pretty surprised if anybody you got who was really junior had a lot of process coming into into whatever environment you had. But let's say you are a software company and you run an agile process. You want to talk to that person about how they're going to fit into that process, how they're going to be a part of the product development from an information development perspective. You want to talk to somebody about their perspective on how they're going to be dealing with the search aspects and the ability for people to find content. So writing content is great, but if you don't break it up in a way and tag it in a way and deploy it in a way and monitor and maintain it in a way that people can find it, then it's not all that valuable, right? So if nobody's reading it, content doesn't do a great job for you. So I think you got to have a little bit of library science behind you, and those types of notions for organization and sticking to a process and being very detail oriented. So I have I would like to say friend, probably mentor as well, who they don't ever hire on skills, they always hire on personal attributes. Their thing is that if I have a job that needs somebody who kind of acts like this, so very detail oriented, very process driven, probably very type A type person, he's going to go find somebody that looks like that as a person. And I think those things are really important when it comes to an information developer, being able to repeatably do the same thing every time and have a consistent result come out, because that's one of the things that drives good information is consistency and readability and all those types of aspects of it.
Nice. Okay.
We got into a little bit of this, I think, in terms of thinking about how you're going to, you're a small business, you've got some software product or whatever, and you need to start thinking about how am I going to set this up? It's not, we know we need tools, we need resources with this kind of, attitude and these kinds of skills. Now what, in terms of, I've got a bunch of content sitting over here, or maybe I don't, and, do I need to think about converting that so that it fits this model that we're trying to set up, or should I just start over from scratch?
So I would probably encourage people to start over from scratch if you're small enough, and use the old content as a guide. So even if you look at where we were in the fairly recent past, we had all of our content in data, and we started from scratch. We did that because the content was not bad, there was something wrong with it, but it had aged enough that it just needed to be rewritten. And also there was a lot of voice issues. So you see this in software all the time, where you look at a piece of code and it's 80% the way there, but going in and fixing this and that and getting it to remerge back into the code base just isn't worth it, so you just rewrite it. And so to a certain extent, modularity helps with that. So if your content's already in data, you can pull it apart. We did a little bit of that. But if it's in Word, you don't really have that option. So you might be doing some copying and pasting out of your old pieces of content. And if the voice and the language and all that stuff is good, copy and pasting can be a really good strategy. But if it isn't, especially when you're small and you probably have one person who's writing this content, having them go and write it and just start and build a skeleton, frame it out, have everybody agree, We do that in a program called Coggle, actually, which is not our software. It's a mind mapping software, and we transfer that into our software. We get our skeleton, then we go and we transfer it into a data map, and then we go and we fill it out, and we keep the statuses in place so we know the health of what's going on there. It's much easier to see progress and status on something that's being written from the ground up in a modular, structured method than it is to look at a Word document and say, what's the status of this document?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have no idea. So if you just go and you say, all right, let's say we've got less than 3,000 pages of total content, and just say, we'll use it when we need to use it, we'll reference it, but realistically, we're not going to take time trying to do surgery on this. We're just going to start fresh, and we're going to do it right this time, and we're going to use good practices around, modularizing, tracking status, consistent workflow. We're going to adhere to a style guide, so we're going to use the same types of structures throughout our content so that it comes out looking nice and consistent for our users, all those types of things. I think you get a lot of benefit in that, across the board in many different aspects.
So the process, in addition to, making that decision up front, are we going to reuse anything of what we've got versus, starting over, is to be thinking about, what are the structures? Can you walk through, because you mentioned a couple of those, and we'll make sure, we might want to put together a checklist as a follow-up for this. It says, you're starting from scratch here. Here are the things that you need to think about in putting your user support plan together in terms of developing information. So we know that there's a structure and that there's, a focus on modularity and a user guide. What other elements would make up the components of that plan?
So I think I keep saying a style guide, and I think having at least a rudimentary style guide is a really good idea. We're trying to make our style guide generic enough, and mostly that's through filtering, which is a function of data, that we're going to publish ours so that people can just pick it up and use it. And when I say publish, I don't mean a PDF. We're going to actually release the data files, so you could load them into whatever your data system is and change them. So I think that to a certain extent, you're thinking about semantics. So are we going to use code phrases around everything that has anything to do with this type of an element? And at first that may seem unnecessary, or it may seem like it's overthinking the problem, but down the line it gives you a lot of capability, and it also gives you a lot of consistency. So when you go ahead and you publish that, maybe you publish it to the web and you decide that it was really hard for people to read the code phrases because we just bolded them on the web, and people couldn't tell the difference between a certain type of heading or a figure title and a code phrase. And what they were really looking for is to scan down through a document and find a command. So we need to go and we need to make all of our commands mono with font and blue. I don't know, because that's going to improve readability. Well, if you didn't go through the process of identifying commands as being wrapped in code phrases, well, then they're probably all just bolts, and what are you going to do? Well, you're going to spend weeks redoing it, and maybe you redo it and you wrap them in blue bolds with italics or something like that, and then you figure out that doesn't work. Whereas the other way around, if you use the semantics, you can just go in and make a change to the CSS, and it's done in 5 minutes. Or you could do A/B testing. There's people here who love A/B testing. So you get to decide, is this more readable? Is this more readable? So it really gives you a lot of ability to work with the user aspect of your content, to work with the semantics, to interact with the search around it, to just do all those things that makes your content higher value down the line than just having it. So I know that it's really, really tempting when you don't have the content, or especially when you have a big Word document, you're like, oh, we've got to get this on the web, we've got to make this searchable, to just try to convert it or copy paste it or something like that, and try to get it done really fast. But you're just going to be so much better off in the future if you take the time to do it right, build it, think about how you're building it, look at it as a development activity. This is content development today. This isn't writing. Something that we say every time we we have our our sales slide deck or whatever it is, because we really fundamentally believe that we're not writing manuals. This is content development. It really has a strong purpose from a functional perspective, and this is about empowering and enabling people to do something more effectively, which is the same thing that software is about. So look at it from that perspective, understand that what you're doing today is a little bit different, and then go through that process once you laid the groundwork to really do it right.
Yeah, I think that's a critical statement that you made there, is to look at it as a development activity rather than, oh, I'm writing the user manual kind of thing. Because what I still see in so many organizations is this idea of, we can leave the documentation until the end, and if it doesn't come out when we release the product, that's no big deal. And understanding that how much has changed around what people look for before they decide to purchase something, and building accordingly has it has done that convergence thing that you hear a lot of talking about between what the marketing folks are doing and what the TechCom folks are doing. There's a lot of convergence because the users are on a different journey than they used to be on.
Yep, that's absolutely right.
All right, so we've heard, you've mentioned it before, but assuming that the folks watching this are somewhat new, elevator pitch for DITA versus XML versus going proprietary.
So proprietary, I'm going to start there. So proprietary, from a pure day one functional perspective, is often not any worse than DITA. However, when you're in somebody's ecosystem, that's where you are. You're done. And a lot of proprietary solutions will tell you that they can export to Word. I am yet to see one where that is actually true. Or excuse me, not export to Word, export to DITA. A lot of proprietary solutions will tell you they can export to DITA. I'm yet to see one that I believe that's really true. They might get in the ballpark with some caveats or something like that, but I have never seen clean DITA come out of a proprietary solution. And I think that the reality is that tools change. Nobody stays in the same piece of software forever. Nobody stays in the same process forever. Nobody has the same set of users and developers working on or with this content forever. So when you're in a proprietary system, you're banking on the idea that you're never going to want to do anything that system doesn't do. You're never going to change your team over to a team that doesn't want to use that particular system. And the idea that your content is always going to be just fine inside of that ecosystem, and you're not going to want to share it with somebody who doesn't want to use that ecosystem. So you have no interoperability for people who are outside of your inner ecosystem. You have no future-proof plan for changes in technology, use cases, those types of things. You're really banking on whoever your provider is to maintain that for you. And you're really banking on the idea that you're going to consistently employ content developers and reviewers, contributors that want to be inside of that ecosystem, and there isn't anything out there that's going to fit them better. So that's proprietary. I think that a lot of the tools are very good from a tools perspective, but I think as a general decision, you just shouldn't use proprietary formats for something that is as high value as your core business content and your core business knowledge that you're looking to deploy to your customers to make them more successful. So then weighing DITA versus custom XML. This is a question that we got a lot when we first started selling our product, which was 5 years ago, I think, maybe even 6 at this point. It was a while ago, by some measures. We don't really hear this anymore, and the reason that we don't hear DITA versus, custom schema or custom DTD is because that is just cheaper. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. There's all these really smart people that have done all of the structural work that you're going to end up doing anyways in a custom schema, and they've laid all of the foundation. And the reality is that it's good stuff. They've made good decisions because they had a really wide breadth of experience that they put into this, and I haven't met one of the people who work on the data technical community yet who isn't a really smart person. So you're getting all of their effort for free when you choose DITA is really the reality. So if you look at the cost difference between implementing a custom XML schema versus implementing DITA, it's not even a question.
Okay.
Did you catch it? Just to make sure we're on the, as we're getting close to the end here. So.
Yeah. So because we're getting down to the end of our hour here, so we're going to do one more question. And this is your opportunity here. I mean, I think you've done an outstanding job talking about a lot of what else is out there that has good points and bad points, etc. But this is your opportunity at this point to sell the audience on easy data for smaller businesses. How easy is it to use? Can it scale with my company? Does it need to be cloud-based? Those kinds of questions that a smaller, less content-savvy CEO might want to ask you.
So yeah, I mean that's a big part of our target market is enabling people who either don't have the resources or don't necessarily need something that is really complex or want something that's really complex. So kind of going in down the list of what you talked about. So cloud-based, it's my opinion that really all software should be cloud-based. There's a couple of reasons I think. In particular, CCMS software should be cloud-based. For one, your IT department, if you have one, as a large organization, is really good at managing SharePoint or Alfresco, Lotus Notes, email, all that kind of stuff. But I guarantee you they know nothing about managing a CCMS. It's just not core IT infrastructure for most organizations, whether or not it should be. So you end up in this situation where you have a bunch of people who probably don't really want to deal with your new CCMS, and it's going in there and it's creating a cost, and it's probably going to end up with a poor experience and probably not excellent support from an IT perspective. Whereas if you go with a cloud provider from a CCMS perspective, and we're not the only one, we're one of them, those people, that's all they do. Everybody here in this at our organization, all they do is work on cloud CCMS products. So you're getting an efficiency there that I just think is silly to leave on the table at this point in time. Outside of that, if you're a small organization, you probably can't realistically afford to put one in-house because you just don't have the IT resources, and they don't have time, if you do have IT resources, to be learning how to manage it. So from our product's perspective, how easy is it to use? I think it's very easy to use. Of course I do. I think the fact that we sell into organizations that don't care about data from a technical perspective is credit to that. We've had customers who've been with us for months and sometimes even years ask us what the heck that data part of our name is. So so I think that from that point of view, we have a pretty easy to use system. That being said, getting all of that process together, I don't want to oversell that. I think that you can't just go and pick up software and all of a sudden have all these magical things happen. But then on top of that, I think the thing that really spawned this conversation initially was the fact that we had just recently built a WordPress connector or configuration for our connector framework. And I think that that's really big for a lot of organizations because if you look at the pure monetary outlay to get to a structured, well-organized system, they can then publish to what is a very professional, better than a lot of enterprise organization style documentation site. I mean, the cost is just so much lower. It's like $30 a month for a professional WordPress site. It's however much a month for Easy Data, depending on how many users you have, but it's in the hundreds usually for very small organizations. So you might be looking at a total cost of a few hundred or more, in that range dollars for a very, very solid information development and distribution system for a small organization. And look at the cost compared to other things. It's a no-brainer.
Okay.
All right, a good sell. There we go. We gave you The final question made sure everybody really understood what your solution could do. We are running out of time. We got about 5 minutes here. I think we're going to wind it down. It has been a very interesting discussion for all sorts of reasons. One, to try to bring and provide opportunities for smaller businesses to participate and really compete against a lot larger companies. All of this seems to be an opportunity for them to build brand, for them to consolidate work and really eliminate redundant processes. We didn't really touch on the WordPress connector that you have and some of the future stuff that's coming out. That will, I assume, be talked about a little bit on the webinar.
I don't think we're going to have enough time to get into the WordPress on this webinar. We've got a lot to cover, but we will be having webinars specifically focused on publishing in the very near future. And I think we'll probably have some articles on TechWhirl in the very near future as well. So there won't be any lack of information, but I don't think that we'll be... Oh, and for those of you in the San Jose area, I will be at, TC Camp this weekend, and my little commercial pitch thing is just going to be a very quick interaction with the WordPress connector to show people kind of how that works. So if you want a live demo, that's a place to get one.
All right, great.
Right on. So make sure if you're watching this again, our final pitch here. We hope we answer some of your questions. Please, if you are in the market, take a look. You got a link on our site, the ad. Click on it 3-4 times. Valentine's Day's coming up. Give the gift of easy dinner. But also reach out and chat with Patrick and his team there and ask some more questions. We'll certainly be able to answer that on the WordPress and everything else. We hope we've answered some of your questions, and maybe you got brand new ones. But Patrick, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Al. I always enjoy doing these. I always wanted to be on broadcast television.
Tens of people watching right now, man. So for Connie and myself and everyone at TechWhirl, thank you so much for watching. We do hope this was helpful, and we hope you have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thanks.